Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. So when people think about what was the greatest accomplishment of our last century, I always ask the question, and people say, well, isn't it the fact that we put a person on the moon? But I actually think what's more spectacular is the fact that we almost doubled our life expectancy during that period of time. If you were born here in Ontario back in 1900, your life expectancy would have been 51 years of age. That was not much more of a gain than the Roman Empire when it would have been 35 years of age. But now today, on average, you can expect to live to 81 years of age, and many of us are going to live even longer. I think that's what's spectacular. And I want to introduce you to someone. This is my patient who I just saw on Tuesday. This is Mr. W. Mr. W is 104 years of age. He still lives independently in his own home in downtown Toronto. He is fiercely independent. You know, he actually jokes that going to a long-term care home, which he would qualify for, would be called, he calls them pre-funeral homes, right? Or God's waiting room. He's fiercely independent, he wants to stay independent, and he wants to live at home. And sometimes people say, well, 104, he must be demented. But, you know, he always keeps some Rubik's Cubes beside him on his windowsill there. That's how he keeps his mind mentally sharp. And he represents what our face of aging is looking like in Canada, in Ontario, and in our community here today. So Mr. W represents the fact that we are aging, and he's an inspiration to me. And he also represents what we have to look forward to as we age, because a lot of people think that aging is a disease in our society. But really what I like to say is that aging is a triumph. But we have to understand that as we age, we will age differently over time. For example, I had a 93-year-old patient the other day who was saying, why is my knee starting to bother me, right? And I said, well, it's called mileage, right? Cars don't even last that long, right? So the fact that your knee has gone 93 years without any trouble, that's pretty darn good, but there are things that we can do to help. But we have to understand that as we age, our bodies will go through changes. And these are things that we've never experienced societally ever before. The fact is that as we age, for example, our bone mass and our muscle mass start to decrease over time. It's why we've all heard about osteoporosis, but very few of us have heard of something called sarcopenia. That just means that our muscles become thinner and thinner, they waste away if we don't actually keep them active. And that's why it's important to stay physically active as we get older. That's why Mr. W does exercises 3 times a week with his personal support worker, because that actually helps. But it's also understanding that as we change and as we age, our needs are going to be different, and then we have to actually understand those and respect those as we build the communities that we live in. This, for example, is what it's like if you have changes in your vision, for example. So we know most of us are blessed with normal vision, but if you have cataracts, if you have glaucoma, if you have age-related macular degeneration, the question is, how would you actually view the world? How would you interact with the world in particular? And how does that mean that we have to respond to a society knowing that over the next 20 years, the number of older people in Ontario and in Canada is going to double over the next 20 years? We know that more and more people are going to be living with these conditions, so then the question is, how should we make those signs? How big should the font be? You know, what should the color contrast be so we can ensure that all of us can actually be able to actually navigate our surroundings? That's the important aspects when we consider the needs of an aging population. So I want to tell you a story, and it wasn't the greatest story, but it was a story that helped me learn a lot about what we need to do differently when we think about our hospitals. Mr. W, in fact, this was about 4 years ago when he was just only 100 years of age. He was minding his own business, puttering around his home with his walker, and then he developed a pneumonia. William Osler always used to call pneumonia, as 100 years ago, the old man's best friend, right? Well, it tried to befriend Mr. W. Mr. W got ill, and then, as we know, as an older adult, we tend to have less physical reserve with us. We all get tired when we get old, and for an older person, if they get tired and they get weaker, it means that they may not be strong enough to do things like, you know, be able to transfer from a lying to a standing position. So Mr. W was trying to recover at home with some antibiotics, but then he had a fall. And his son actually believed that it would be better for him to actually go to a hospital on a Friday night. Well, Mr. W used to walk around with his walker, but in our hospitals, what we tend to do is people don't feel well, so we say, stay in bed. You know what? Let's put an intravenous in you, and let's put a urinary catheter in so that we can help do things for you and actually, make you feel better. But the problem is for older people, that robs them of their independence. And it's that independence, that ability to do things for themselves, that keeps them from getting weak, keeps them from becoming frailer, and keeps them from falling down. This is just a diagram that actually explains kind of what the journey can be like for an older person. Because in hospitals, Mr. W enters the hospital and people don't really know. They can't pronounce his long last name, so they might just call him dear or sweetheart and so on. We strip people out of their clothing, we put them in gowns. So we make them dehumanizing experiences. We make sure that they stay in bed, and frankly, when you don't feel terribly well, you're going to lay in bed and take it easy. But we know for older adults, for every day they're lying in bed, it takes them 2 days to recover the physical function they lose because they're literally losing percentage points of their bone and muscle mass over time. So the things that we do normally that worked well when we founded our healthcare system 50 years ago, the things that work well for a younger population we're realizing don't really work well for an older person. I'll tell you this fact, that when we actually founded Medicare 50 years ago in Canada, the average age of a Canadian was 27 years of age. So just think about that. If we were designing the healthcare system at a time when the average Canadian was 27 years of age, we wouldn't have designed the care of our hospitals the way we do now and the care of our healthcare system. Today, older adults in our province represent 14% of the population, but they represent 49% of our hospital admissions and 60% of our inpatient bed days. Most of our hospital days are occupied by people like Mr. W. And that problem is that we've created a system that works for a younger population, but it doesn't work for the population we have in front of us today. And that's why we have more and more older adults who are suffering from the current systems of care we created, not because we're trying to cause harm, but because we created a system that's not responding to the needs, or as I like to say, the patients have changed and the system hasn't in particular. And this is the dilemma that we have, because if we keep doing the same thing over and over again that we're doing now with people like Mr. W, the problem that we're going to end up having is that this is going to cost us billions and billions and billions of dollars more to try and meet the needs of an aging population, given that there will be more older people, they'll need to use our services, and if they're using services designed for a younger population, you're going to get the results, from the system that you actually designed. So Mr. W, after 48 hours in the hospital, the gentleman who was able to walk around with his walker, he was so bedridden after 2 days that he actually needed 2 people to lift him up so that he could actually go to the bathroom. So we recognized immediately what our hospital was doing to him, so we changed our ways in which we worked. We now make sure that we screen all of our older patients right at the beginning of their hospital journey so that we can make sure we can identify people like Mr. W who are at risk for bad outcomes. And then we make sure that we start putting in those protocols, that we make sure that we mobilize people so that if you can actually, sit up, we'll make sure that you're sitting up in your chair for all of your meals. I always joke and say, this is Mount Sinai Hospital, this is not the Mount Sinai Hotel. We are not competing with the Four Seasons anymore. We're not going to give you breakfast, lunch, and dinner in bed. In fact, we're going to keep you mobile, and we're going to make sure that we preserve independence to get people back home. And that strategy has worked for us. We slashed our lengths of stay, we're getting more people like Mr. W home, we're keeping more people like Mr. W home, and that's been our journey as an organization to become what we call an elder-friendly hospital. So the question is it just our hospitals that need to change, or is it the broader society as a whole and the way we approach the development of our communities? And I say it's actually all of us and everything we do. Because just like we talk about hospitals that need to respond to an aging population, our entire healthcare system has to evolve, but also the communities that we actually live in. And this is the concept of the age-friendly or the elder-friendly community. This is a definition that the World Health Organization puts out, and I always get shivers every time I read this definition because it really tells us it's about a community that respects older adults, it promotes their needs and understands what their needs are, it respects that diversity and anticipates and responds flexibly towards their needs. And the fact of the matter is, as we age, we want to make sure that we can age in place. Every once in a while, I'll ask the question to an audience, how many of you aspire to end up in a nursing home? And nobody ever puts up their hand. We all want to age in place. We all want to live independently in our own communities. So how do we actually enable that? And this is a concept that's now gaining fire around the world, the concept of elder-friendly communities or age-friendly cities. This is actually a diagram that shows what that actually means. And it means it's not just thinking about the health system and the health care that we actually provide, but it's about making sure that older adults have access to affordable housing. We make sure that older adults are involved in decision-making around things that are important to them. We make sure there are opportunities for participation in volunteerism, that there's socialization opportunities, and that there's opportunities to make sure that we give people the access to the information they need, and also the buildings and the facilities that they need to navigate around. It's understanding that because older people find it harder to push things, to pull things, to lift things, that maybe the way we design our spaces need to be differently. Maybe we need to think about the park benches that we actually have in our parks and how we can make them more elder-friendly, making sure that our buildings are actually accessible. And you remember the diagram that shows the different forms of vision that we have, how we can actually design our signage. Simple little things that we can do to make sure that our communities are age-friendly, if you will. And it's understanding that even something basic like transportation, often we're such a car-loving society, we say, well, you know what? I'm just going to keep driving, build more roads. But for older adults, public transit or community transportation services are so important because I'll tell you something. Most older adults in our province outlive their decision to stop driving by 10 years. So if I took away your license or if I took away your car, you gave that up today, and you had to give it up today, how would you navigate around the community? It's one of those things that we're all going to age and we're all going to get there. So it's an opportunity to start thinking about how do we actually design our cities to be age-friendly, and not just for old people, but for all ages. Because when you design a city that's good for everybody, it's good for everybody. So I always say, why does Mr. W prefer this park bench? This is a bench that's been designed, again, it looks like any other park bench, except it actually has arms. And it's the idea that we recognize that because older adults have lower muscle mass, those big muscles, those quadriceps that we have that are really important for lifting us up and out of a seat without using our arms, really important feature of our bodies that starts to wither as we get older unless we participate in regular exercise. So just adding arms to a bench means that someone like Mr. W can safely navigate a park. Safely navigate a park. Participate, engage in our community in a meaningful way. But I also point out to mayors and to other people that this actually allows you to keep people from sleeping on those benches as well. So you know what? It's not just about age-friendly, but it's being smart and thinking about flexibly how we need to do things differently. And often, these things don't cost a lot of money. Telling you about the things that we did at our own hospital, last year it saved our hospital $6.4 million. That's bending that healthcare cost curve that we're worried about. And building cities that are accessible means that we can actually allow people to age in place. They don't end up having to go to nursing homes, which actually ends up costing us all a lot more money when you think about it, because nursing homes aren't for free. We all pay for them through our taxpayer dollars. And frankly, it's not what any of us want. So why should we force that onto people who don't need to go there when we can simply put some arms on a park bench and think a little bit more inclusively about older people when we're designing the spaces that we want to live in and what we want to navigate. So this is a lovely picture taken of Mr. W after he got out of hospital about 4 years ago. And I'm happy to tell you that he's still living independently in his own home. He made his prediction the other day to me. He's always a bit of a soothsayer, and he said, I guarantee you that in 2 years, all babies will be made in China. He's got a subversive sense of humor, as you can tell, but I can tell you he's thrilled to be living at home. It's where he wants to be. It's where we'll end up wanting to be. And I think that's why it's Ontario's time to lead, and it's our time to lead together. Thank you.